I'm sure you're very much aware one of the topics of interest at the moment is what's happening with inflation in our economy and whether that's something that we should be concerned about. Particularly as property developers, it's very important to have an eye on that. We've seen dramatic price increases for lots of building materials recently. The good news is that that does seem to be now on a downward trend, but nevertheless, it obviously plays havoc with your projections. And it's very important that when you come to buy land that you are very much aware of all the costs that are involved in that. And we run a free training called the 15-minute land breakthrough, and this is run about every 3 to 4 weeks, and you can find when the next course comes up in at our website builditandprosper.com/find land. So if you go there, I'll put a link in the description below anyway, and if you go there, it's a free training. It runs about an hour, and we give you an insight in what you need to do to find off-market land, make sure it's a viable proposition, and negotiate a price. And the key is to finding the off-market land, because that's when you are very much more in control, rather than what a lot of people do is look in estate agents' windows or buy from surveyors who tend to overvalue land. And I'm sure if you've been looking, that's what has been your experience. Anyway, let's return to inflation. Inflation actually doesn't worry me. It's one of the reasons I think, if I'm realistic about it, is why I got into property. I experienced very early, as you know, some of you who have watched this channel for a while, I purchased my first property in 1973, and this was during very high inflationary periods. During the 70s, we saw inflation run at 25 to 30% and spiraling, continued into the 1980s, and took a long time to actually conquer. And so naturally, there is some great fear about what would happen if inflation takes off. And so maybe just to give you a little bit of comfort and some advice is also a little bit further on about what to do about that. I thought I would share that story with you and how that actually really got me interested in property in the first place. Hi, my name is Jim J. Davidson, and I first invested in property in 1973. I completed my first new build development in 2006. As you can imagine, I've made lots of mistakes along the way, but thankfully I've got some things right, and I've managed to build a property development business. In this channel, I want to help you on your journey and perhaps share some of that knowledge with you. And so through this channel, which I hope you will subscribe to, or through our membership app, which I hope you will join, and incidentally it's free, you can learn a little bit more about building houses and building a property development business. The app is available wherever you get your app from, whether you're on iOS or you have an Android phone, or you can get accesses on desktop, and you'll find a link in the description below. Anyway, I hope you enjoy the rest of this video, and please post your comments in the description below if you have any comments to make. So as you're aware, the first property I bought was in 1973, and I bought that property for $7,500. I didn't buy it entirely myself. My brother was also, we had a half share. Prior to that, the money had been invested in the stock market. And one of the things that I didn't actually know at the time, but we had actually pulled our money out of the stock market, and 6 weeks later, the stock market started to crash. And over the next 18 months, the stock market lost something like 73% of its value. This was in the UK, and it was the greatest fall of any country that I've been able to find in the world. It did crash in the States, but not by that extent. So the stock market crash was absolutely very, very dramatic. And so you can imagine if you take 73% off that valuation, I would have been left with very, very little money. But I was lucky, I can't say that it was anything other than luck, that at the time I was looking to buy this property, and it was really more at the instigation of my brother, who's 4 years older than me, that we bought this property for 7,500 and secured that. Now, what's really interesting about that is what happened over the next few years, because we went through a spiral of high inflation, and part of the reason that inflation took off and why it's probably a bit different, but it could be the same today, is that prices can go up, and that's okay, and wages can go up. But when the wages start to then spiral, and there's no increase in productivity, then that's when you start to get into that dangerous area of inflation. And so at the moment, wages are rising, which is a good thing, but are we seeing the increase in productivity? So that's the thing that you really need to be keeping an eye on. What is happening to the productivity? If productivity is going up, then it's good that wages are going up and productivity is going up. If productivity is not going up, then that wage increases, while is necessary to cover the inflationary pressures, it will lead to an upward spiral of inflation. And so what had happened was that in 4 years, so we have 1973, by 1977, my brother wanted out of this property. He had moved to another city, and he wanted to buy a property for himself outright. And so we agreed on a valuation of the property that I would purchase his half share out. And his half share, well, now the property was actually worth 14,000. And so I was then able to take a mortgage out for his share. And so that mortgage was essentially 7,000 for his share. And then 2 years later, in 1979, I actually sold this property, and I sold this property for 21,000. So there's two things that are significant there. One is obviously the property had kept pace with inflation, so the asset that I had remained. In other words, the currency had remained at its real value, and so therefore I wasn't concerned that I had lost money there, because I had it in assets. Had I had that in the stock market at that time, I would have been in a very, very poor state. And so this really created my real interest in property when I saw that happen in a 6-year period, to go from 7,500 to 21,000. But the second thing that's significant here is that the debt, so the debt there at 14,000 was 50%. But the debt, by the time that you come to the debt of 7,000, and that's assuming that nothing was paid off, and of course it was, then the debt is now 33%. So in real terms, my debt had come down with actually very little payment. Now, interest rates were above 10% by this stage, and in fact they actually rose to one point at 17%, so very, very high. I mean, in fact the base lending rate was 17%. I'm not actually sure what the mortgage rate was, but it was very, very significant. Of course, this was in the days where there was really very little private investment in property. There wasn't any buy-to-let mortgages, there weren't any short assured tenancies or assured tenancies, which meant that once a tenant was in there, they could be in there for life, and indeed they could actually pass on the tenancy to anybody who's living in the property. So if there was like a child and the parents passed away, they could then pass on that tenancy to the children. And so therefore effectively it was extremely difficult to actually remove somebody from that property. You couldn't even say, I'm going to sell the property. That was not allowed. So so a very, very different scenario. However, I then was able to buy the next property, which I bought for just actually over 21,750, I think it was. And in 1983, I sold that for 32,000 and some change. I can't remember. £388. That's right. It was a very strange figure. The guy came in actually within 5 minutes. I had essentially sold the property of it going on the market, but it was a fairly hot market then. So you can see how dramatically my original investment of 3,750 had produced a considerable windfall. So that's the first thing, is in terms of property will protect you against inflation when you hold assets. But what about as a property developer? How would that affect it? Well, this is why it's fundamentally important that when you're looking at a piece of land, because land is the first stage of development, and can be the only stage of development. I know a lot of property developers who just source land, gain the planning on it, and then sell it on to other either developers or self-builders. And in fact, that's essentially the training course that I actually have. So we have the free training course, but we also have a paid for training course, which is called Find It. And it's essentially the 9 stages that you go through to find land and be able to then have a viable asset at the end of it, generating at least a 25% return on the valuation of the end product, not of the valuation of the land. So a house that would be 100,000 would mean that you're able to buy the land at a price that would then give you for the overall development of at least 100,000 in that example. So it's very important that when you come to the negotiation stage of finding land, that you have properly assessed all the costs that are involved. And so what often happens is with surveyors is that they'll look at 2 pieces of land and they will assume that they are like for like, and very rarely is that the case. There's different components that go into it. So inflation is like a lot of other aspects in the economy. You'll have probably seen from a previous video, if you've watched it, where I talk about the all economic activity ending in the land. So let's assume that you have a town here and a new major employer comes to the town. Let's say it's in some sort of technology field, so they've got a lot of high-paying jobs. So what happens is that then starts to create a demand for new employment. People come to the area. This then in terms pushes up the land values, and conversely it pushes up the house prices, but it's essentially the money that's going into the land, all economic activity. So then the land around this area becomes more valuable and rises in value. Eventually the pressure on this area comes to that some people can't afford to live in here. Now imagine that there's another smaller town over here, and people start to maybe start to commute here, but the local authority decides that they're going to really facilitate making this easier for people to travel, particularly with so much talk about the environment and green energy. And so they decide that they're going to put in a very good public service link of some sort. This could be a train, could be a tram line. In other words, they make this very efficient for you to be able to access here. So now a lot of people find this much more attractive to live in this area here, and they start to move out here. Well then, again, the land value starts to increase in this area, and you have this a greater activity here. Eventually the land, this area starts to expand as well because it reaches capacity, and so this fuels again land values going up. So the inflation essentially ends up in the land. So as prices go up, that inflation, that extra money then ends up in the value of land. And so as property developers, as long as we are investing in land, or we're investing in property itself and doing it with the right process, then we have nothing to worry about inflation, because that will always increase in value. And even if it takes you a little while to actually gain the planning on there, during that period of time, if inflation is moving up, the land will increase in value. And so this is a very significant way to actually preserve your assets, as opposed to other areas which may be affected adversely. So I believe land is a great asset to hold, and it's something that you shouldn't be fearful, but you do need to know the correct process. So I hope that take maybe makes you feel a little bit more confident of the way forward, and that you feel comfortable with inflation, which is not a great thing to be happening to our economy, but what you do want is you want to preserve your assets and your ability to operate in that market. So if you're new to the channel, please subscribe. If you haven't already subscribed, remember to hit that notification bell. And have a look around. We're approaching now 100 videos, and also we have a free membership community called Build It and Prosper Members. Sorry, it's called membersbuilditandprosper.com. So you can join us there, and you'll find some free tools like the plot checklist that you can download, the blockwork calculator, and some other bits and pieces. It's also an opportunity to network with other self-builders and property developers, and there's a couple of groups there that you can join and have some interaction. Anyway, until the next time, please stay safe, and if there's anything that you would like to comment on, then please put it in the comments below. Take care. Bye-bye. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more videos, then click to watch the next video. Please remember to visit our website at builditandprosper.com, Together app, or click on the button on the YouTube header if you're on desktop.